Here's something nobody talks about. Every generation gets a label. Boomers were the optimists who rebuilt the world. Gen X were the loners who quietly kept it running. Millennials were the idealists who got crushed by student debt. But Gen Z? They get called lazy, anxious, addicted to their phones, soft. And most people who say that have absolutely no idea what this generation actually lived through to become who they are. Generation Z, born roughly between 1997 and 2012, they're the teenagers who were in middle school when the pandemic locked the world down. The young adults trying to buy their first apartment while rent has doubled. The employees your HR department calls difficult to retain. The people who seem permanently online, but somehow feel more alone than any generation before them. And here's what almost everyone gets wrong about them. Their psychology isn't a glitch, it's a response. A very logical, very understandable response to an environment that has been genuinely destabilizing in ways no previous generation ever experienced at their age. Think about what that actually means. Not just smartphones, the internet itself. Gen X discovered the internet as adults. Millennials grew up as it arrived. But Gen Z opened their eyes into a world where the internet was already the air, already everywhere, already watching. Picture this. It's 2010, you're 9 years old. You don't know it yet, but in 3 years, you'll have a phone in your hand. And with it, access to every opinion, every piece of news, every crisis on the planet, all arriving in real time directly into your developing brain, every single day. A 2023 report from the American Psychological Association found that Gen Z is the first generation to grow up with smartphones as a near-universal experience, with 95% of teenagers having access to one. But what gets missed in that statistic is this, that phone wasn't just entertainment. It was where social life happened, where friendships were made and destroyed, where your worth was measured in likes, where one bad moment could become permanent, public, and searchable forever. Previous generations made embarrassing mistakes in front of maybe 15 people. Gen Z made their mistakes in front of everyone they'd ever met, plus strangers, plus algorithms designed to amplify the most painful moments. Their nervous systems didn't get a chance to develop outside of that pressure. Psychologists call this context collapse, where all your different audiences, your parents, your teachers, your friends, your enemies, exist in the same space simultaneously. And Gen Z has been navigating that every single day since before they were old enough to drive. Here's the part that gets misread constantly. People look at Gen Z's anxiety rates and assume weakness, but look at what this generation was handed. They were in elementary school during the 2008 financial crisis, watching their parents quietly panic about money. They were teenagers when school safety drills became a normal part of the school day. They came of age during a pandemic that canceled their graduations, their first jobs, their first real tastes of adult freedom. And they did all of this while being told in real time that the planet they're inheriting has serious problems nobody has solved yet. A study in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology found that rates of stress and emotional exhaustion among young adults increased by over 50% between 2005 and 2017, with the sharpest rise beginning around 2012, exactly when smartphone adoption among teenagers became widespread. But here's the important thing. A nervous system on high alert in an unpredictable environment isn't broken. It's doing its job. Gen Z's anxiety is a feature of their psychology, not a flaw. Their brains learned early that the world can shift suddenly, that safety isn't guaranteed, and that you have to stay alert. That's not weakness, that's adaptation. Here's what makes Gen Z genuinely fascinating. They are simultaneously the most connected generation in human history and the most lonely. They have more ways to reach people than any generation before them. And yet, study after study shows they report higher rates of loneliness than even the elderly. The U.S. Surgeon General's 2023 advisory specifically identified young adults aged 15 to 24 as experiencing the sharpest increase. And here's why that paradox exists. Connection online is fast, broad, and low risk. You can have 500 followers who sort of know you. You can maintain 20 friendships through memes and voice notes. But the depth, the slow, uncomfortable, vulnerable work of truly being known, That's harder to find in a world where everything moves at the speed of a swipe. So Gen Z learned to stay connected on the surface while quietly protecting the interior, fluent in digital intimacy, often starving for the real kind. And there's something else underneath this. Gen Z watched millennials be authentic online and get burned for it. Careers ended over old tweets. People shared their truth and got destroyed in the comments. So they developed what researchers call strategic self-presentation, a curated public face that reveals just enough to feel relatable, but never enough to be truly vulnerable. They're not fake, they're protected. And given what they've watched happen to people who weren't, can you really blame them? Gen Z gets called lazy because they leave jobs that don't treat them well, entitled because they ask about mental health days in interviews, uncommitted because they won't grind themselves into the ground for a company that might lay them off anyway. But none of that is laziness. All of it is pattern recognition. They watched millennials do everything right: college, debt, hard work, every rule followed, and still couldn't afford houses, still got crushed when the economy hiccuped. Gen Z looked at that and made a logical conclusion. The old contract was voided before they arrived, so they didn't sign it. Instead, they built values around flexibility, authenticity, and work that actually means something. They're not less ambitious. They're ambitious about things that can't be taken away in a layoff. Gen Z is the first generation that grew up with climate data presented as fact before they were old enough to vote or do anything about it. They didn't become aware of it gradually as adults. They've known since childhood that the planet has a problem the adults in charge haven't solved. Psychologists call this eco-anxiety, and it's more widespread in Gen Z than any previous cohort. But it doesn't show up as dramatic panic. It shows up as a low hum of "what's the point?" underneath otherwise normal conversations. It shows up as dark humor, a generation that can make the funniest meme about a collapsing future and genuinely mean it at the same time. That's not nihilism. That's how you survive caring deeply about something you can't control. Gen Z might be the most psychologically complex generation to ever come of age, not because they're special in some participation trophy way, but because the pressures they were handed, digital permanence, real-world instability, global crisis, and the collapse of traditional institutions, all arrived simultaneously during the exact window when identity is forming and the brain is most vulnerable. They didn't get to grow up and then encounter the chaos. They grew up inside it. And what came out the other side is a generation that is, despite everything, more openly empathetic than the ones before them, more willing to name things, more honest about struggle, more likely to say, "I'm not okay," when they're not okay. Which, if you know anything about psychology, is actually one of the hardest things a human being can do. So the next time you're tempted to call Gen Z soft, just pause, because what looks like softness is often just the first generation brave enough to tell the truth about how hard things are. And there is nothing soft about that. If this gave you a new way to understand someone in your life, or yourself, please subscribe. And share this with a Gen Z person who needs to hear that they make complete sense.